Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Oscar and I have just returned from Machu Picchu and share some highlights of the trip, plus more of Oscar Asks Me Anything, where we delve into the philosophy of excellence versus consistency, the Barbie movie, and more. I always love these conversations with Oscar, and for those that tune in on YouTube, we have now decided to stretch and work on mobility while conversing, in case you're interested in watching us online. It's just another episode where Oscar and I go down the rabbit hole and never really come back up. So listen on, let us know your thoughts, or if you have questions for next time. My favor as always, though, is to please continue to share this podcast with others. It would also mean so much if you would rate it and leave me feedback. If you would like to help keep this podcast going and support the work I do, visit my website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to become a patron of the show or make a one-time donation. For comments or suggestions, reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Oscar.
Hello. Mimi, is that the way? Was that how I was supposed to do it?
I have no idea, but those of you listening in on audio, if you tune in on our YouTube channel, you will see that we are sitting at our house in the gym. And that's why there's like all these random things around us. But we thought we would multitask, as is something that I say I like to do and try to be good at, so I can get two things done at once. It's like lunch and once. Once. So wanted to get a little stretching and movement in, but also record a podcast because I have been falling behind.
Okay. And of course, as you know, I am always just ready, willing, and able to serve. Ready to do my duty, reporting for duty, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so those of you watching or listening and wondering what is happening, we're going to be doing some joint mobility while we have a conversation. If you are listening, if you could imagine us on the floor in the gym, but also there's this like random board that's a ramp. It is not for skateboarding tricks, which is what I thought when I initially saw this as I walked out into the gym, and it is actually Oscar training for I'm training to get a one arm, one leg push up. Okay.
And I realize now at 44, you can't just jump in and do it. So this is my coach, Brett Jones, suggested that instead of doing push-ups, elevated one arm push-ups where your hand is on like a chair or any type of surface where your hand won't really be optimal, like it's not going to be the way that it is on a floor, that he said, well, what you could do is just get some plyboard, which we happen to have, and then I have some plyo boxes behind me, but and then just over time lower the angle, but that way my hand is actually in the same position that it would be if I were doing the push-up on the floor. But because the board elevates my upper body, then it's less of my load on there.
Okay.
And that will then over time get a little lower. I am sort of running out of time, though. I've got about 4.5 weeks left. So I think that's enough time.
It's the final countdown.
Correct.
Yeah, so this is not any like follow along routine or anything. It's just us literally moving around so that we are trying to keep our bodies in some sort of functioning state.
Well, also we just came from a couple of over 1 hour meetings sitting down.
Yeah, actually I had 3 1 hour meetings.
You had 3.
Yeah.
And that's too much.
It is too much.
And so
and I am also kind of rehabbing a bit of a knee strain. So some of you may know from following us on social media, because that's a thing people do, and we've posted some of our pictures from Peru.
Okay. So let's get this party started. Yeah. How about this?
And we were in Machu Picchu, in which I was unable to do the hike. Not just because I have a strained knee, but also because of my aversion to nature. But you successfully did the hike. I'd love for you to share with our listeners all of the things I missed during that hike.
You missed nature, which you do have an aversion to, an allergic reaction to. You missed some pretty vicious bug bites. Like there were these tiny little, I wouldn't say there were mosquitoes that bit me.
Like no-see-ums?
So, yeah, it was no-see-ums, but I could see them. You know what I mean?
Okay.
and I had like, let's say, I don't know, about 6 bites pretty rapidly before I was able to put on some repellent.
Okay.
And that stayed with me for about a week and a half. There were some really big horse flies. So if you were bit by any of those, I think you would die.
Yeah, I would have had a serious issue because I have very highly sensitive histamine reactions to things and everything. But I meant more, and the hike was difficult, but I meant more how beautiful the hike was.
The beauty of Peru and Machu Picchu.
Yes.
Right. Got it.
That is kind of what I was hoping you would share.
I understand, yeah. It was very beautiful. And you know what was really cool about that hike actually up to Machu Picchu? As amazing as Machu Picchu was.
Okay.
And Machu Picchu...
Because I did get to see that.
Right. When you're doing the hike, right, and you get to the top where you then kind of sort of overlooking Machu Picchu, and you realize that was made millions of years ago with this weird earthquake or a kind of volcanic eruption or something, which collapsed this mountain into this kind of flat area that they were allowed to build on. That is amazing to be there, to be at the top of the mountains. And you were there for part of this as well when we were actually touring. See the fog coming in. You're like, oh, I'm actually like when we're flying up in an airplane, this is what it's like.
Yes.
When you pass clouds and things like that. So that was actually pretty cool.
Yes, being up there.
Yeah, up there as opposed to down there.
Yes. And those of you watching, I'm actually just crawling towards the camera now to make sure that we are good.
That we're recording.
Yeah. Just always have that paranoia, you know, and since this is one of those casual ones where I'm like, okay, we don't have to be seated in the chair perfectly. I felt like it was fine to get up and go do that. In any case, it was really beautiful. And I will say, and I did share this with my Patreons. Shout out to all of you because you are the best. Thank you so much. Wow, those Incas were quite amazing engineers and builders.
Okay, let me just bring something up right now.
Go for it.
Okay, and then we can get into other stuff. But we can do whatever we want, actually, because it's your show. And you can cry if you want to. But I am I believe with a lot of these things that are amazing feats of architectural ingenuity, that I have this amazing faith and also awe of humanity. Where
like the Incas.
To your point,
and the Egyptians.
The Incas are probably some of the best wall builders of all time. Because when you look at the way they form these rocks, and the way that they laid them and then also notched them so that they're anti-earthquake. They're
right, like at an angle a bit.
Well, it's like they're straight, but then the corners have these weird notches in them, so that when it sits, and then knowing that it's that earthquakes happen, they built these amazing structures to withstand that.
Yes.
So that you got to give props to. And I guess I'm just not in the camp of, oh, aliens came here, built these things, and then disappeared forever. I'm more of the camp of like, hey, you know what? Some really amazing humans did amazing things, and maybe it's possible that their deep knowledge was lost, just like so much other things are lost, and maybe over time we'll understand how they were able to do it. So that's what I got to say about that.
As a matter of fact, from some discussion with a student who, knows a lot about architecture and had to study these things, there has been studies that have proven how some of these things were built through like satellite imaging and how big stones were moved from quarries and things like that. Not necessarily that site, but other sites.
So you're
I don't know all of the facts and stuff, but apparently science does actually catch up and help uncover these great mysteries.
So, okay, there's two things I want to say. One, this whole two things I want to say, I don't know why I do that all the time.
Yeah,
I do that a lot, right?
I do it too. Okay, so there's two things. I'm like, are there two or there are 200?
Yeah.
Because for me, there's usually about 200. So I should start saying that there's 200.
I should stop saying two things I want to say about that. I should be like, there's a lot that I want to say about that.
Okay.
And I'm going to say a few. You know what? Side note.
Okay.
For those viewers out there, for you faithful viewers, Mimi, can you ask Brett Jones? He does this too. He's really good at making analogy and making points. And a lot of times I hear him say, two things I got to say about that.
Okay.
And I'd like you to ask him that question. Because,
why there's always two?
Because I think he'll also be like, no, actually, I probably have a lot more than two. Okay. What were we talking about? Okay. Wait.
I mentioned.
Yeah, I got it. I understand. You mentioned how a student of yours was talking about, he's an architect.
Yes.
And he actually studied architectural history.
Right.
And one of the points he made, which I'm going to butcher, but I'm going to attempt it anyway, is that...
See, I wasn't going to try to butcher it.
I'm going to butcher it. I'm going to go for it because really...
vague kind of recap.
Yeah, but the reason I'm going to butcher it is because I don't care what people think about me if they think I'm stupid or not. I'm kidding. Okay. He said, when I brought this subject up to him about why is it that people want to jump to aliens? And he said, did you know how much architectural knowledge has been lost over the centuries? Mm-hmm. The Pantheon in Rome, the reason it's still standing is because when Christians came upon it, hundreds or however many centuries after it was built, they had loss of knowledge of not only how it was built, but how to take it down. Right. They didn't have the technical know-how on how to break it down. So, and then to your point, those stones in Easter Island were only recently found that with satellite imaging, they saw that there were lines leading to traces leading to quarries.
Of how it was dragged, yeah.
And so maybe in the future we'll get to learn more and more, but we just have to come to the realization that so much knowledge has been lost.
Yeah.
And what we think of as prehistoric times, or maybe the older times or older civilizations, does not mean that they were less knowledgeable. Mm-hmm. They had deeper knowledge, as we have a lot more knowledge in some regards, and they had a lot more knowledge in other regards.
Yeah, so one thing I would like to share with our listeners and viewers, because we did go on a tour with someone that was an expert, right? And of descent of the culture. Quechua, mm-hmm. Spoke the language and everything, and identifies as like, that is my heritage. And so you had asked a question regarding the spoken language and why was he such a good storyteller? Is it because it was not a written language that was preserved in that way, but it was through storytelling? And like, is this just a generational thing, or are you just kind of a rock star at speaking, at being able to retell stories? And I think there was some value in kind of thinking about that fact of, you know, when we don't have written accounts, then we do lose it through generations if that civilization is no longer around. But to continue telling those stories, right? But then how we learn, though, is so different, because in that time period, if you think about it, you had mentioned, well, if all you did was learn how to do masonry, make concrete, build, or take these rocks and build them, and that's what you did all day, every day, through generations also, right? Like, this was your trade. You really knew how to do it. And there was no distractions. I think you used the analogy of, you know, people didn't have like TV shows in their heads, or even even necessarily songs that you hear on the radio that you're memorizing or schoolwork, or it's just, that's your trade and that is what you do and that is what you know. And it's you're like a master of that. And so it's a different time. Like we can't even imagine what that would be like, right?
Yeah, I think of all of the knowledge that I have in my head and knowledge that has been lost, right? So we all, we've gone through school. There's probably things that we learned and forgotten and whatnot.
Oh, definitely.
But just in general, to use one of your favorite words, the plethora.
A plethora.
Of things that we know about from the entire all the seasons of The Wire to hip hop lyrics to books that we've read to decades of comic book history,
all the
food we've eaten, to science shows that we've watched, all of that information that we have in our head. What if all that human capacity was just focused 16 hours a day to learning how to build a wall through generations, and you didn't have TikTok to distract you? I think that you will have a lot of knowledge that, because there's not a written language and because those civilizations were then pretty much decimated when Europeans came and brought illness and slavery and all this stuff, that things got lost. Mm-hmm. And to jump to the conclusion then that, well, how do they do this? We don't understand. It's got to be aliens. To me, and I don't want to, I don't think of it, I don't want to insult anyone or anything.
No,
I actually would rather give props to humanity and to that culture.
100%.
So
I agree with that.
That's, I guess, is the main point that I have about that. And I'm open to also being proven wrong when our alien overlords come and come back and say,
Absolutely.
Hey, yo, we did this.
Next time, tag it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Next time, tag it, aliens. And again, it is not to belittle, disregard, or put down anybody who has that belief. It's just kind of interesting that is the first go-to versus marveling in the ingenuity of these craftsmen and these engineers and that civilization as a whole, right? It kind of takes their credit away.
Well, think about if we had no idea, if we've never before ever seen an iPhone, mm-hmm. but it was working, but we just came upon it. We'd be like, this is straight up magic.
Witchcraft. Because we would have no idea of how that was made, right? Right.
So I don't know. I had another point, but I don't really know what it is right now. But I do have
two things.
Yeah, and my tangent was, why is it that we say two things and look at where that got us. But what I do have is other questions.
Okay.
If you're ready for them.
I guess so.
Do you have anything else you want to add to from our Peru trip?
I do want to say just huge gratitude to my cousin who invited us to share in an experience that I don't want it to sound like that I was like averse to just because there was nature involved, because absolutely any opportunity to see another culture and be in a place to marvel in history and also to marvel in nature is always a really good thing. So I appreciate that. And it was very nice to be eating really amazing food while we were there in Lima as well. Some of the quote unquote world's best list, to get all bougie about it. But always grateful to share those experiences, and especially with you.
Oh, thank you. Well, ditto. But that brings me, I guess, to a question that I didn't even have that I thought I was going to ask, but I'll just...
Gee, that's weird. That never happens.
But I'll ask it anyway, which is, we talk a lot about what is it that really matters in life? Mm-hmm. And going to places like that are really cool. It's a really cool experience. But when I look at, for me, they were your cousins, you know, and it's so cool because one of your cousins' cat was like, no, you're like Oscar, you're one of our cousins too, which is really cool, right? But
I mean, you have been around forever.
Yeah, right. I guess once you're there
at the birth of their children, it's
to me, what's really cool is you reconnecting with a cousin of yours that you hadn't connected with for a while, and picking up kind of like that. And also spending time with family. So as amazing as it is to go to these places, when you go with other people, it is a lot more enriching. And I've come more and more to believe that that is, for me, the grand purpose of life. Is like at the end of my life, it will be the accumulation of all of these experiences that has the greatest value. And so I try to, like when people ask me, "Look, how was it?" I'm like, "Oh, it was really awesome." And maybe it was a location, maybe it was the food, maybe not, but really it's, you have to just look at that entire experience from thinking about it to being there to then talking about it afterwards. That accumulation of all that is so valuable. And I don't know, I guess that's what I want to say. What are your thoughts?
I agree. Obviously, you and I, as a married unit, have discussed a lot about what matters to us. And we just got off of an amazing podcast with a friend of ours, Jason Chu. We talked about hip hop and how much we enjoy that and everything. And it's just like, well, what really matters, like you said, are the memories you have with something and that connectivity to it, and being able to have these feelings, right? And I think that, yes, it's a good excuse to pick somewhere everyone's never been or wants to explore so that we can have a purpose, like a goal of why we're going here. But really it's the journey and not the destination, which is kind of like life, right? And something that I've had to work on because of my anxieties and, fear of death and thinking about that ending and, oh my gosh, there's so much to do between now and then, and what is it going to be like? And this is where, my mental health has definitely become something that is at the forefront of always trying to ensure that I'm moving in a direction in which will mitigate negative mental health thoughts and anxiety and everything. And so I know this isn't like your quote, what you came up with all on your own. I know a lot of people have said this, but the whole journey, not the destination concept, and just reminding myself of that is super, super important, right? And so it's less about, okay, this is the trip, we need to get here, we have to see these things. And, while I do need to have an agenda, I do need to have contingencies, I do need to have great experiences while I'm there, really valuing that journey and really valuing the memories that we create and make is less about where we're at, and how we're doing it is more important. So,
okay, I want you to remember that as you're planning our next trip for hours on end.
But that's part of the journey.
Right, for you. And I'm just saying that
Yes.
It's okay if everything isn't maximized.
Are we going back to the maximizer satisfier conversation? Did we talk about this in the last podcast?
I don't remember.
I feel like we may have.
We may have, but
yes, we may have.
But we'll move on. Things that I've been thinking about.
Okay.
Notes that I take down that I'm like, oh, what's your take on this?
Okay.
Because I know that you know what you're good at? Riffing.
I'm a riffer.
You can just be like, oh, I got
Okay, so I
thoughts.
tell Oscar, okay, we need to record more conversations, and he's like, all right, well, what are we discussing? I'm like, I don't know, we'll figure it out when we get there. And he does not like that.
I don't like that. It's not that I'm not a planner, but I want to know what we're talking
Well,
about.
that's interesting because I'm a hyper planner
But you can just go,
because I have more than two things to say.
right? And I have two things to say, and I want those two things
And you
to
don't
be
remember the second one.
exactly if it's not written down. All right, something that I've been chewing on for almost like 3 days. I've actually re-listened to this conversation multiple times, like this part, between two of your favorite authors, Malcolm Gladwell and Adam Grant.
Okay.
They're actually pretty good, like sparring partners in a very friendly way, because they're both so smart. But it was just it was a question that was framed, and I was like, let me chew on that as well, which is it better to be consistently good than intermittently excellent? Are you looking more for optimal performance or average performance? And then, there's this back and forth and questions were asked like, oh, let's think about this. Like, for our friendship, do I prefer your optimal self to your typical self? What do I prefer? And then another back and forth was, yeah, but when we're hiring someone, we always hire for their optimal self versus their typical self. And I just thought it's a pretty interesting question because instinctively, I think I would prefer someone's typical self or their average self. But then as I thought about it more, I was like, but we need those optimal performances over time. So I guess, I don't know, how do you think about it? Because you could take that question to every part of life, to something that's very specific, like Kung Fu. It could be something very specific to like, this is how I would hire someone. You could take it to, this is how I would approach friendships, family. Like, what is the preference? Either optimal self or
and so that in itself, the question is the answer, right? Because it depends on the situation for me, for almost anything. So the very initial question you asked was,
is it better to be
your
consistently good or intermittently excellent?
Okay. And you're asking, like, for me, is it better for me to be consistently good?
For you, let's take it two ways.
Intermittently excellent.
Is it better for you to be that way? And then how do you prefer with your relationships too?
So that's why I said it's very situational. Like, it's so hard to put things into a one scenario and apply that to all. But I guess if it was like this magical world of like, no, you can only choose one for all things, I would probably, my blink to Malcolm Gladwell, would be the optimal. But when you started to relay the different scenarios, I think the consistently good resonates because that's more of what you get, I guess, you know what I mean? Like that, I guess in my mind, the word consistently means, okay, well, I know what I'm getting. Like there's going to be consistency there. And then I guess the teacher in me is like, well, I can make them optimally, intermittently excellent. I can help push for those moments if there's at least something, a baseline to start with. But for me, I need to have intermittent excellence. I mean, I feel like I need to have consistent excellence.
Okay, I think that's the right answer for you.
Yeah.
You prefer...
I actually prefer...
let me change the question and to fit my answer, which is what I want is consistent excellence. That makes sense. Well, I think one way that they were discussing it, which is... And it went back and forth, but there was this conversation regarding, well, look at someone like a teacher. They have to be consistently good.
Yes.
Day in, day out.
Yes.
They need to put in the work. And then...
Right, because if you got 3 months of not so great teaching, but then they've got one great day, that doesn't equal a good classroom.
As opposed to, I think the example used was, what about a comedic performance? That is intermittently excellent. For that performance. You're excellent because it's well rehearsed. And what do you place more value on? And yes, the truth is, with everything in life, it depends on the answer. But in a broad stroke, I think I would still go for intermittently good, consistently good, being consistently just good and doing the things that are just average day to day, but doing them consistently, rather than having, because that's just the way that I think that's the way that I am.
But also you're a fitness professional. So if I were to ask you, is it better to work out consistently well and good, or just have intermittent, amazing workouts? The answer is, well, what is your goal, right? Or what do you want out of this? Or how's that working for you? So obviously, if it's general well-being, fitness, fat loss, better energy, better sleep, all those things, consistency is the key, yes?
Yeah, I think consistency is a huge part of it. And maybe it's weird because I've been thinking about that as well, because I'm always questioning, like, is this the best way to frame it? I guess I have this huge aversion to definitive answers. And because I've noticed that in the past, I used to be that way.
Right. Well, everything is gray,
But I don't think that it just is consistent. I don't think that consistently good just applies to health and fitness. I think it applies, for me, it applies to everything. Because that's just the way that my brain works.
Right.
I don't see myself ever having these intermittent excellent points, So
But I feel like for an inventor or some sort of like scientist that's trying to discover the cure for XYZ, or somebody, they've got to have that freaking excellence moment, because that's where things happen, right?
Which comes to me after
consistency.
Years and years
Right.
of being consistent.
So that's why I said the answer is really like, it's both, right?
but I guess the way that I'm thinking about it now that we've had a little bit of time to talk about it is in terms of relationships, of what I'm looking for if I were to look for in a person.
In terms of relationships, I want consistently good.
Right. Yes. And so, because to our point earlier, like what matters in life is experiences, and experiences happen usually with other people, right? So I guess the value that I would put a higher value on consistently good on a person. I'd put a higher value on that person rather than someone who's just intermittently excellent. In any instance, like in anything. I think that's how I would look at it. But I know that you would want consistently excellent.
Did you know I was going to say that?
No, but there was no surprise.
It's not surprising. Right. But the thing is, when you talk about like the relationship, of course, consistently good, because like I said, in the same teacher scenario, like 3 months of not so great, but then like one really good day with your partner or a friend or your sibling or something is not really ideal. Like definitely consistency is comfortable. But like, that's why I said it depends on the scenario.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know. There's a lot of ways that conversation sparked things for me, and a lot of times I think about it, and then I always then bring it back to, well, what does this mean for me? Which means, what does it mean for like me as a coach, or what does it mean for me as your husband, or what does it mean for me as a martial artist? And so it brought about this thought of, in order to be consistently good, which means you're successful, or even intermittently amazing, right? What is the environment like that allows for that to happen? And so a lot of times we preach on, if you take something for fitness or as examples, like, yeah, you need to just do these things. But maybe the question asked even before that, if you just take a few steps back, is your environment optimized for you to then be successful in whatever it is that you want to do? Does that make sense? So like, I guess a deeper question is, or a way to coach someone that would be more beneficial to them would be, instead of saying, hey, I need you to do these things and do them consistently, is like, hey, are you ready to do these things? Like, do you have a support system at home? Do you have these things organized, ready to go? If it's going to be, I'm going to be drinking water, do you have your water ready? The entire environment has to be prepared in order for you to be successful. And I think that matters. And that's true whether you believe that you've put a higher value on consistently good, or whether you put a value on intermittently optimal. The environment supports you. I don't know. I was just thinking about that. That's all.
Okay. So when you listen to like, where did this idea, this was from Malcolm Gladwell, Adam Grant. So when you're listening to these podcasts, do you like, because I want our listeners to be in the mind of Oscar right now. Like, do you like hear the whole thing and then go back and take notes, or do you stop, or is it right at that moment you're like, wait, I need to make a note on this, or is it a day later you come back to it, or does it just depend?
It depends. So in an ideal situation, I listen to something, it sparks an idea, I hit pause, I think about it. I'll rewind that bit, just like, let's say it's even just 30 seconds, listen to it again, and then see, do I still have that feeling of, wow, this is interesting.
Okay.
And if that's the case, then I'll write it down. Sometimes. Other times I'm listening to stuff and I'm cleaning the bathroom.
So you can't.
And I'm
really
like, I can't touch anything.
Right.
And so in those instances, I will re-listen to sometimes an entire podcast because I was like, wow, this entire thing was really good. And when I re-listen to it, same principle is like, does it still have that impact? Does it still make me think of stuff?
Okay.
And this was the case with this. And I don't know how to verbalize it or to, it makes me want to have a conversation about it, knowing that I don't have an answer. And so, but it started branching off to different things. Like it started branching off towards this thought of the environment, and then a conversation we had with our friends who were here for dinner about, well, we're just part of something that's greater, like, than us, and that's how we're successful. Like no man or woman does anything on their own. We're all part, so I don't know why, but that question had me jumping from all these things.
Interesting.
And I was like, I don't know, I just want to chew on that a little bit more. And probably what I should have done is like started writing it down, because writing it down and seeing if I could make sense of it would lead to a better conversation. But anyway, that's one thing that I've been thinking about.
Okay. Well, thank you for that thought. Stream of consciousness.
Stream of consciousness.
Oscar. That'll be the name of this episode. Oscar's Stream of Consciousness.
All right, moving on.
What is that? Can you share with our viewers who are like, what is he doing?
Okay, so this that I have in my hand is a fat grip. And a fat grip is exactly what it's named. It makes something that you're holding on thicker. So for example, it's meant to be put over a bar, like a barbell or even a dumbbell. And once you put it over that, then it's got a bigger surface area for you to grip, which taxes your grip more, which should lead to greater strength. I like to use it also because it has a little bit of give, not a lot, to create more of that tension. So like if I were doing
like you're doing some sort of like arm things.
Yeah, like if it ramps up the intensity of recruiting more muscles in order to do that. So right now I'm just kind of playing around with it in my hand, but not doing anything with it. So
yes. Well, I've actually been getting quite a good stretch.
Oh, you have?
Yeah.
You're feeling better?
I actually am. This whole moving thing is quite revelatory. It's a good thing. Not sitting at your desk at meetings all day. This is a much better thing. Next time, I think at the Zoom meetings, I'm going to bring my laptop. I'm like, all right, guys, I'm just going to stretch now.
It's a much better, yeah. So actually, let's talk about something here as well, which is your friend was saying how she only likes to read physical books and only likes to do that at one time. And we were trying to explain the benefits of audio learning. And she was like, yeah, but that means that I won't be 100% focused on what I'm doing. And if I had 10 minutes, I bet you I could find some research on the benefits of moving while learning, because we were literally, our brains were evolved to move us in space. So they are so interlinked. The act of doing something physical while processing things in your brain, they're just so linked, and it helps amplify. Well, so when, for example, I'm doing something like washing the dishes and listening to an audiobook, or I find sometimes that is a better way for me to process it than if I were just sitting and just reading. At least now. Maybe I've trained myself out of just sitting and reading.
Well, that was where I was going to comment, is that it is a learned skill. So I think there's definitively value to sitting and reading a book. I think there's definitively value to being able to learn, listen, auditory, and movement and all of that. I think there's benefit to both, but I do think you're right. There is some science, because I know even like you said, like when you move, then your brain is ready to kind of absorb and even maybe doing it at the same time. And if you think about Kung Fu, it is kind of that, right? Like we're exhaling, we're breathing, we're moving, we're recalling a sequence of movements. There's lots of things internally and externally that's happening in one space. And that's why Kung Fu is so good for your brain, right? There's a lot that happens there. And so I think hearing an audiobook or a podcast or something and doing the movement and everything like that is definitely, there's a different benefit, right? So there's a different list of benefits than, a tactile sitting down where it's quiet and you're just reading. But I think it is a learned skill because some people are visual and some people are audio learners, right? And so it's weird because I know people used to ask which one I am, and I would first initially probably say like visual, right? But I'm not sure now because I feel like I do need to hear the explanation of things and instruction, but I don't know.
Well,
I think maybe
really, I think the answer is the best way to learn is with immersion, which means it's all of it. All of it. Mm-hmm. It's
no, not the best way, but what learner are you?
That's what I mean.
Okay.
I think for anybody, like I think these are all I thinks, right?
Yeah.
Where we would say, oh, this person's a better visual learner. This person's a better auditory learner. This person's better. I think everyone's best form of learning is immersion, which is a combination of all of those. It's just the percentage that you get from each of those things that's going to vary for people.
Right. So which one is stronger?
Which one may be stronger, but I think that the best way for anyone to learn is a little bit of everything. In the same way, like how you really drastically improved your Mandarin from where it was to when you were practicing, was you just went as like, I'm just going to converse and I'm going to mess up and I'm going to, and I think that's the best way for most things to learn. But good news.
But I meant more like, what's stronger for you?
Oh, for me personally?
Yeah.
I don't know anymore.
Right. That's the thing. I used to feel like I had a definitive answer, and now I'm like, not so sure.
So, for example...
Learning difficult.
For example, I'll listen to a podcast, and then I would sometimes then go on YouTube and find that person and hear something. If it's something that is maybe a physical movement culture type of thing, then it's definitely more beneficial to see that being done. And then, of course, if you want to learn that, then it's more beneficial for then you to actually practice it. So again, it's that combination of all of it. And then after you practice it physically, going back and then listening to it again. And, just in the same way you talk a lot about when you're teaching Kung Fu of the layers and then going back and making those layers more dense. So, but what I was going to say about the good news is I remember my second point.
Oh, okay.
And it's because you use this term a lot, which is there's science behind it. Let's believe in the science. And a way that I've been thinking about this is not believing in the science or not believing in the scientists, but believing in the scientific method, which is the same thing. I think we are both meaning the same thing. Yeah. But I believe maybe it was something from Neil deGrasse Tyson where he was kind of really breaking this down, which is scientists are flawed, science is flawed, but the scientific method is sound. It's for with all of the combined efforts of humanity and human knowledge, the scientific method is the best way to prove something as factual. And maybe not even as factual, but for as factual as it can be at that time. And that process is like, well, let's get different sources and then let's test it out. And then multiple people test it and then everyone's coming to similar conclusions. Okay, well, that's now what is established scientific fact, but we're not even saying that we're believing the science 100%. We believe the scientific method, which brought us to that. And the same thing with, I'm not necessarily believing the scientists, even though I do. There are some people that are like, yeah, I believe what they say. It's really because I know that, or I believe that they came to that conclusion with the scientific method. Yes. And so that was a point that I wanted to make about an hour ago.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that's just like a technicality of how we're explaining things. Of course. But yes, got it.
What are your thoughts on... You like this segue?
We got two questions.
Boom.
Yes.
Jumping right into it. What are your thoughts on... this is another thing. And this is just me writing things down and then you just talk about it as you want.
That's fine.
No one owes you anything. You owe it to yourself to be the best person possible, because if you are the best person you can possibly be, then other people will want to be with you. And then when those people are with you and they're like, wow, this person is providing something, you get things in exchange for the value that you provide. And I wish that was a lesson that I learned really young, and not just recently, where it's like, I feel like I've learned it over, a while ago, but I wish I had learned it really young, which is no one owes you anything. There's more that I have to say about it, but what's your initial thoughts on that? Because you teach so much youth.
Yeah, my initial thought isn't really from a teaching perspective. My initial thought just kind of comes to me from me always questioning the content I'm putting out, like even in this podcast, right? And so you usually telling me, and because you've done all this research and everything, and I know you don't like to take credit for any ideas, so it's obviously from something you read, whatever. But like, if I go to write something, if I go to put out content, I don't really need to think about who I'm putting that out for. Like, okay, I want to reach a zillion people. I want everyone to love it. I want everyone to listen to this. I want everybody to resonate with what I'm writing or what I'm, the content I'm providing. And I think I just need to just start first with like, okay, what is my voice and what do I want to share? Why do I want to share it? Like kind of go internally first and just like do something for myself and then be able to say, well, I feel very strong about this. I feel very strong about education advocacy. I feel very strong about women's rights and reproductive justice. I feel very strong about gun control, or I feel very strong. And like, I want to talk about that because I feel really strongly about it. And whoever decides they want to listen to my take on that will, and that hopefully they will see value in that after that. I don't need to try to placate to everyone. And also as a human being, and as a teacher, as a person, as a daughter, as a wife and a cousin and all these people, like you can't please everybody. And I'm usually in an environment that is a crowded one. I am one of 28 first cousins. My mom is one of 9. So lots of family around all the time. Kung Fu school is hundreds of people around, so it's not like I was raised in an environment where it was just like, oh, I just need to make my parents happy. I always felt like I had to make everybody happy, or I always felt like I had to prove things to multitudes of people. It wasn't just a very small audience.
Which sounds exhausting.
So it is. And so I've had to learn that I just need to kind of learn to please myself first and be comfortable in that space. And then that, in effect, I will find my humans that want to listen to my podcast or watch me stretching randomly and turning upside down or whatever it is I've been doing this last hour. So yeah, and I agree. I think there's a lot of things I wish I'd learned when I was younger. That certainly is one of them. And I think that's also just being comfortable in your own skin. Yeah,
so I think that's a valuable lesson, not just if you're a content creator, to think of things that way. Like, one, you're the first audience that you're trying to please.
Yeah.
Knowing that there's other people out there that will resonate with that. But you're right. If you try to please everyone, you'll end up pleasing no one. That can only lead to frustration. But unfortunately, we have been sort of trained to think that way.
Yeah, and social media certainly has not helped.
Yeah.
Right? It certainly has not helped. Like, how come I only had 5 likes on this, but I had 5,000 on that? That's not any better. This content isn't better than that video. I thought this one was better, but yet this algorithm is showing. So it's just, it can make you absolutely crazy. But I think ultimately, not just the like, you can't please everyone, but, and you said you won't please anyone, but you certainly won't please yourself. Like you certainly will make yourself unhappy. Like if it's a perfect formula for unhappiness. And I definitely wish it was something I could have learned as a young person, because it had never been presented to me in a way of which it's like, well, what would you like to be doing? Like what makes you more comfortable or happier, or what do you want to be working on? So yeah, I mean, that's a interesting question, because I think it's one of those for me, how you're like, oh, this is going to make me think about this for days or something like that. And so it's certainly something that brings up a lot of different thoughts and images of different ranges of my life, right? Different ages of my life.
That's super cool because when I asked that question or I made that comment like, hey, no one knows anything. What do you think about it? You went completely different than what I was thinking. And that to me is so fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's so different because you have conversations with people.
Yeah.
Or as teachers, we try to teach people through communication and and sometimes you don't connect. I find this super interesting because it's like, wow, you went in a totally different way you answered the question or you went through the thought process, but it was your unique way of doing it, which is why I write these things down because I don't think I would have gone that way. But I guess the other thing that I wanted to add to that is that comment in this kind of consistent quest of having nuance and never having a definitive answer, right? Of like, yes, but, or yes, and it's like, no one owes you anything. And I think everyone should owe you something. Like, for example, no one person owes me anything. I really believe that. But I think society as a whole, we need to be able to help people who fall through the cracks for whatever institutionalized issues that they have. I don't have the answer for it, but I don't know. That's why I write these things down because it makes me think of stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think I kind of addressed the second half of that versus the first part of the no one owes you anything part. Because like, it was just the first thing that came into my mind. Yeah. So I kind of went with that train of thought. But on, no one owing you anything, it's definitely, I think as kids, we don't ever feel that way, right? Because we feel we're supposed to be taken care of. We're supposed to get these things. We are entitled to them, right? Even me as a AAPI girl, like I was entitled. I felt like I deserved or I should get love, care, food, all these things, right? And then it's kind of like, well, have they been earned? And it's the chicken egg. Like you start asking questions. Well, do you just get that because you were born and then that's it? You're entitled to these things or you're owed anything? But I think as a teacher with students, I would say, yes, you need to learn to earn everything, right? And you need to earn respect. You need to learn to earn accolades. If you want to get a compliment, you need to earn that. If you want to get better, you have to earn that. If you want new material for Kung Fu, you want to learn a new sword form, you got to earn that, right? So I think that concept is probably not highlighted enough, but because we're in the martial arts, it's like kind of built in, like everything has to be earned. That next move, that next step, that next, being in the Kung Fu space, you have to kind of earn that.
And it's earned not just with skill, but with work ethic, personality.
Well, it's definitely also
respect.
not just earned with money. Like you don't just get to sign up, pay money, and then say, I've earned this.
Right.
I get to learn this. I'm like, no, this allows you to stand in this space and be present, but earning it is a whole different thing. And as the Sifu and teacher, it is our job to now teach them that cultural path and teach them that this is not a transactional thing where it's like, I'm going to buy this banana, I should get it. And that's it. It's very transactional. It's very clear at what's happening. So yeah, that concept of earning things, I think, is important.
So
we're wrapping up, yeah?
We both just saw the movie Barbie.
Yes.
And so, actually, I thought it was really good.
I just want you to know I have my pink sparkly nail polish on, and shout out to my nail tech Bri.
You could probably have a conversation with someone else about this, but
with the nails? Oh, with Barbie.
Just Barbie in general. I would just say that I really enjoyed it. I thought it was extremely well done, but it made me think of something else that I had written down, which was the term toxic masculinity being used a lot. And someone, and I didn't write down who, but said, you know what, I don't think we should use that term. It's really what it is an abuse of power. And it doesn't need to be toxic masculinity because what all it is that someone who's in a position of power, they're abusing that right. Whether they know it or not.
Yeah. And I think this is where people would say the reason toxic masculinity is a thing is because the likelihood, the percentage, history has shown that males are in power, right? And so it comes from a place that is calling that out. And I think that we often get too caught up on, well, why do we have to use these words to describe it? Because it doesn't feel good, right? Like, especially if you are a male, it does not mean every man is toxic. It does not mean men are not feminists. It does not mean that we are putting down the patriarchy and all men. Well, actually, the patriarchy, yes, but but like all male, individuals or those that identify as male, however that may be. But I think that abuse of power is definitely true, and I think that rings factual. But I don't think the words toxic masculinity should also be downplayed when we do need to point out that until the power has shifted to where it is not predominantly male, and in the balance of power isn't so blatant, that it does need to be pointed out, because I feel like that is then minimizing the fact that there is such an imbalance of power, right? So I think it's two different things. I think abuse of power is one thing, and I think toxic masculinity is another, and that we're pointing them out for different reasons. Not that abuse of power cannot be part of toxic masculinity, but I feel like there's a specific reason that those terms are used.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, that's just, like I said, something after seeing that movie, I was like, oh, I like that. It made me think of that term.
Yeah.
And yes, there's this huge imbalance of power. It's also interesting hearing someone else had mentioned, it was like, oh yeah, of course, I know that movie was good because certain people were really upset about it.
Yes.
And I was like, who would be upset about this movie? It's just like trying to promote pretty good message overall. But I guess there's always...
Because people's feelings get hurt about the fact that they were implying that it's a man's world.
What?
I know. It's kind of interesting though, right? Because I think if it were the reverse, the people who have criticism for that would not be as sensitive to it.
Yeah, it makes me think of how often we get sensitive to things, and then certain people have a audience or a way of then expressing that anger.
A platform.
Thank you, that's the word. A platform to express that instantly.
Well, everybody's social account.
Right, yeah. And in order to be heard, then outrage is the method to then have the loudest voice.
Yes.
As opposed to taking some time and thinking, as opposed to saying, I wonder why they gave me this kind of reaction.
Yeah.
No, the first thing is, here's what's wrong with this movie.
Yeah, well, what's great about you is you always say that, like, ooh, this doesn't feel quite good. That must mean I need to sit and stew in it and feel worse than
no, that's not, no.
Yeah, like even horrible movies, you're like, I like having these feelings. But no, what I mean by that is, if something makes you uncomfortable, that it might be good for you.
Right. I like, if something gives me a visceral reaction, I was like, whoa, very recently, it's not something that's like I'm doing all the time, but more recently I'm like, wait, why did I just have that feeling? That's kind of weird. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Like, I just had this feeling of wanting to punch someone in the face. What is that? Usually I ask if it's hunger, and if it's not, then it's something going on.
Right, because often it's hunger.
Something is going on with me.
Well, yeah. I think it's good because most people don't go to question themselves and say, wait, why am I having that reaction? Is it logical? Where is it coming from? How can I address that? And not, I mean, you practice so much meditation, so I think this is a big part of why you are the way you are with that too. I think it is a skill. You've learned a skill. I'm curious though of how many people I've not practiced that with like harsh humor or an insult. I still do that to this day, right? We are constantly a work in progress. Yeah. right? As humans, we are just a work in progress, and that's all we can do is continuously progress. But to the point of the Barbie movie, you can just take it as a light, fun satire, but there is some really brilliant messaging in there that I think that some really intelligent, scholarly type person can really kind of lay it all out. But I don't think it needs to be that. I think it can also just be, it's fun and there's some really good points and there's some good jabs, just like a good comedy should have. Everyone's so beautiful to look at and the fashion is great. But it was really smartly done. And the director, Greta Gerwig, she's just like, she's really smart about her filmmaking, I think, and the fact that she also wrote and had such a hand in how that story was going to be told. I felt really confident about going in. So yeah, it was just enjoyable. I had a good time.
Ditto.
Yeah.
I don't know if it wasn't for my nephew who's just loves those that
we
Barbie
went to the theater.
That we would have seen it in the theater.
Yeah,
we might have waited.
Would have waited,
but I'm glad we saw it in the theater. And
me too.
And I thought it was just a good experience. But there were times where you go, oh, that was actually really funny. And there were times where I wouldn't say that I got uncomfortable, but it was like this undertone of like, oh, I can see how this would make someone uncomfortable.
Am I going to butcher her name? America Ferrera, like when she did her full monologue on to kind of brainwash people.
Yeah, and because I'm a man, I go, there's almost this
defensive,
guttural, deep down instinct. You're like, whoa, wait, hold on a second. And then, but it was so quick. It was like, oh, I get what she's saying. And yeah, true. Because a lot of the points that for that monologue she was making, I see you doing all the time. And so sometimes this is where I think I have been trying to work on is I realize, oh, this feeling I'm having, it's because probably deep down I've done something wrong or that I'm not sure was probably the best way to do it. Mm-hmm. And so then you go, wait. So I don't know. Overall, great movie. You're right. Listen, if you like really beautiful women and really beautiful men,
it's a win. You can't go wrong.
You just can't lose on either side.
It's so much fun, though.
You can't lose.
They did such a great job. I mean, and they make fun of that too.
Yeah,
right? They make fun of their beauty. Yep. You know, they make fun of her being pretty or whatever. They make fun of all of it, and I think that, I'm really happy for its success. And I think it's deserved, and I think that the acclaim it's getting is deserved. And I think if it makes people uncomfortable, it makes me very happy. Because those are the people that need to be feeling that discomfort. So, yeah.
I like that. I like that. There's always a little bit of like, good. Good for you.
Yeah, what they said and did. I'm going to jump on to their hard work and be like, yes. So, absolutely. Well, thank you for the conversation.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Oh, is that going to be the new sign off?
No. But till next time, everybody.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.